God is good all the time, and all the time, God is good. How you doing this morning? It's fantastic. It's good to see you, good to be with you. Awesome to have an opportunity to worship with you and to be about the Father's business. We are continuing in this series of guidelines for a master. And we said when we started this series that a master is one who has dominion over their human self. Of course, those of us who are here recognize that we are threefold beings, and as threefold beings, those threefolds are As threefold beings, we recognize that we are spiritual beings, we are soul beings, and we are body beings. And when we're talking about mastery, we're talking about the recognition that we must have. Say must have. Not might have, but must have. Say must have. We recognize that we must have dominion over the human self. How many of you know that when you go through whatever it is you're going through, oftentimes we go through that solely with the recognition that we have a human self. Oftentimes as we venture through life and work in our relationships, we do so from the fundamental standpoint that we have a human self. But spiritual beings disempower themselves when they relegate the experience to that of solely their human self. A spiritual being should never go through a human experience without touching the hem of their spiritual garment. Because in truth, that is where your power is. Your power is not in your muscles. I've been on my workout, so my muscles are getting a little bit righter. A little righter, is that right? Righter? All that schooling. Righter? I don't think that's right. That's just me. A master is one who has accepted the mission to bring God's will in their life into manifestation. The path of awareness for the master is for the master to allow their soul, say soul, to be purified from any and all sense of separation. And so when this sense of separation is healed, there is absolutely nothing that can interfere with the unfolding of God's divine plan for you. And so as masters, it's not so much that we have anything to gain as much as we have a lot of stuff to remember. We say the primary cause of suffering is forgetfulness. And so today we go through part 2 of who and what God is, recognizing that when we understand the name and nature of God, that understanding brings forth an emergence of the power of the one who understands and holds what they understand. As Emmett Fox says, and as my brother Reverend Galen likes to quote, there is no such thing as undemonstrated understanding. And so when we understand the name and nature of God, that understanding helps us tap back into our power. And so I'm excited this morning because we have an opportunity to revisit ourselves as spiritual beings, to reconnect our understanding to the name and nature of God, and then to begin to use and leverage that understanding in our life, world, and affairs so that we can be powerful beings and not powerless beings. So just a quick review. We said on 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, wasn't that long ago. From our bulletin, we said that there is but one presence and one power in the universe, God the good, omnipotent, the everywhere present spirit of absolute good. Then we said that God is spirit and spirit is life and life is mind, right? We said that spirit is God as the moving force in the universe. We said that life is that invisible, intangible movement of God. We said that mind is the living, moving part of God, that I am. And so if God is always moving, it does not make sense for you and I to consistently be staying still. If God is the moving force, and if life is the movement of God, and if the mind is the moving part of God, that I am, there is a time to be still, but then there's a time to take action. And if you get those seasons mixed up, you will be being still when you should be moving, and you will be moving when you should be being still. Now, the challenge in the mix-up is if you are moving when you should be being still, you will miss the whispering of the still small voice that only comes when you're quiet enough to hear it as it moves and speaks to you in the silence. And if you're moving when you're supposed to be being still, you will be moving on your mind and not the mind of God. When you start moving on your mind, when you start moving based solely upon what you see, you ever seen something and then started moving a certain kind of way? You ever seen something happen in your finances and you start to move and feel a certain kind of way? You ever seen something move in a relationship and you started to move or feel a certain kind of way rather than just taking a moment to be still, to remember that my soul wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is in him. God is spirit, and spirit is life, and life is mine. And God is moving in your life, world, and affairs. The nature of God is movement. And sometimes the movement of God requires those of us who understand God to take some radical action. When Jesus, I like this. When Jesus was talking to his disciples after the Sermon on the Mount, he started to lay some things out. He started to unpack some things. And he said, listen, if you are angry with your brother or sister, if you insult your brother or sister, if you call someone out of their name, when you get ready to make your offering to God, before you can make your offering to God, you should go and be reconciled with your brother or sister. And as I was trying to understand what Jesus is saying, I'm trying to figure out, why is it so important for me to deal with them before I get my opportunity to deal with God? Because if God will forgive me, then I imagine that that will take care of my disagreement with them. But because God is moving, and moving sometimes requires radical action, what we forget is that sometimes the things that we plant in the universe has to go back and be addressed before you can move on. You ain't got to clap. I'm clapping for myself on that one. That just excited my hair follicles right there. Before I can offer to God my gift, and my gift is a symbol that I desire to be transformed, before I can truly come to the presence of God and say that I desire to be transformed through my experience and my gift with God, it requires me, according to Jesus, to take the radical action of fixing some stuff that's in my past. Why is that? It's because if you think for a moment that you can be separated from the presence of God as your brother or sister, then you have missed the nature of God. I hope you're writing this down, because this is good right here. If you think that you can come into the glory without fixing the issue, then you have missed that God is in the middle of the relationship with you and your brother or sister. And before you come to God, you've got to fix this thing over here. Before you can say that you're ready to be transformed, you've got to fix some stuff that you've already broken. It's not enough to just try and run up the corporate ladder without fixing some of the people that you stepped on along the way. See, the nature of God requires radical action, and sometimes we don't like to go and say to people, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I should have been bigger than that. We'd rather just bury it in our past and hope that nobody will dig it up. But the nature of God requires the realization of oneness, because the thing that you desire, you are already one with. But if you don't know how to handle oneness in your relationships, you don't know how to handle oneness in money. The thing that you desire, if you don't know how to handle oneness in your family, you might not know how to handle oneness in your healing of your body. And so it requires some reconciliation in your soul. It requires some radical action and alignment in your soul so that you can move the thing that you don't see as a barrier, but that is a barrier. The nature of God is moving. And sometimes we have to move with it, and moving with it requires that we take 2 steps back before we take 1 step forward. Are you still with me? And then we said that the nature of God, we asked, what is the nature of God? And we said that the nature of God is the sum total of its basic characteristics. And we said the basic characteristics of God can be summed up in one phrase: absolute, good, omnipresent. That means that good is everywhere equally present. Is that right? And then we began talking about how it is we can begin to work with God as absolute good, omnipresent. We said that when we say that divine mind or oneness is all good everywhere, it does not mean that everything we see or experience is good in the relative world. Did we say that, or did I just make that up? I might have made that up. Don't worry about it. Then we talked about the 5 attributes. We said that God is life, and God is love, and God is wisdom, God is power, and God is substance. Is that right? And then we said we would get to the names and nature of God. And that's where we are today. The names and nature of God. And we have 8 listed here, but we do understand that the limitations of our descriptions are just so that we can get a better hold of the infinite. We do recognize that words do not have within them the innate capacity to fully capture all that God really is. We said that really it's better to live the message than it is to preach it. We said that, and I might be making that up too. I might just be saying this for the first time this week, but I feel like I've said it before somewhere. And so when we start to look at the names of God or the nature of God, it's important to remember that the name or the nature of a particular thing also speaks to the application of that thing. When we're talking about the name or nature of God, particularly when we begin to break down other characteristics or attributes of God, it's important to remember that that gives us insight into how and where we might apply this aspect of God in our life, world, and affairs. Let me give you an example of what I mean. When Noah was busy building the ark for this insight that God has given him, you do realize that Noah was building an ark, and his ark was being built on dry land. And as his ark was being built on dry land, there was no reason that he would be building an ark on dry land when he didn't have a time or space or place to use the ark that he was building. He's building something that he doesn't need yet. See, the mind of God will give you the idea and the inspiration for the thing well before you actually need it. See, so when you understand how to apply God as omniscience, you will move on the inspiration that God gives you, even though in the moment it doesn't look like you have a reason for the thing that God has given you the idea for. And so when you find yourself in the midst of an experience trying to figure out, why am I building this, or why am I going through this, or why am I working through this, it's not for your present moment, it's for the moment that's coming. Because sure enough, the rains are going to come. And when the rains come, the rains are going to raise up. And when they do, you'll be the one standing in the circle with a boat. And everybody, when you were building it, they were trying to figure out if you were out of your mind. Now they're hoping you'll give them a ride. Noah understood God as omniscience. So to my techies, we would say it this way: there's an app for that. Same with Moses. When Moses was being chased by Pharaoh and his army, and there is trouble chasing after him, and it looks like a difficult situation in front of him, Moses is now faced with having to understand the name and the nature and the application of God, and he needs it to extend beyond that which is chasing him and that which is in front of him. I don't know about you, but maybe there's somebody in here who, as you look behind you, there was a world of trouble back there, and as you were trying to figure out where you were going, you were looking at, how am I going to get past this barrier? But Moses had the ability to come to understand God as omnipotence. And when you understand God as omnipotence, you have all the power that you need to take the first step. And when you put your foot into that Red Sea experience, when you're courageous enough to go ahead and take the first step in your Red Sea experience, what you will find, what you will find is that the water that seemed to be a hurdle starts to part, because God as omnipotence knew you were coming by this way. And so you just have to understand how to apply the nature of God in a scientific way through the thing that you're going through. See, those of us who are experiencing financial challenges want to wrap our minds around God as source. See, in that moment, you might not need God as something else. You might want to come to understand that God is the source of your supply. But that's a different approach. That's a different mindset. That's a different understanding. And so when we begin to just sort of unpack the name and nature of God, remember that if you understand it, I said at the beginning, for those who understand, there is a power connected to the understanding. If you understand it, then you can access the power. If you don't understand it, you got to hope somebody will pray for you. If you don't understand it, you got to hope somebody who understands will stand in the gap for you. That's why we teach you how to get it for yourself, because when you go through, you don't want to have to hit the bat line and call up Batman or Superman. You want to know how to access it for yourself. Don't give me no intercessor, give me the direct line. I was listening to Lionel Richie the other day said, for the first few months of his relationship, he and Prince, he said anytime he would get a call from Prince, Sheila E. would be on the other line of the phone. And he said he and Sheila would start to talk, but he said as they were talking, he always knew Prince was sitting right next to her. And Lionel said, Sheila, you tell Prince that I refuse to keep talking to him through you. If Prince want to talk to me, tell him to get on the main line. I believe there's a song we used to sing back in the day. It was something like Jesus on the main line. You better know how to use your stuff. You better know how to tap into your Christ awareness to get what's already prepared for you. But if you don't know how to tap into it, you will think that you have to wait for somebody else. But what you really need is the understanding. What you need is the understanding. It was A.W. Tozer who said, unused truth becomes as useless as unused muscle. So if you don't use it, you lose it. And it doesn't matter how many classes you go to. It doesn't matter how many Sundays you show up at church. What you have to do is take the stuff off the sheet and put it to work in your life. I'm not suggesting that you don't continue to show up at class and at church, because the higher you go, the different the challenge becomes. And you want to keep going higher. You never want to get comfortable in the familiar. You never want to allow yourself to settle for the comforting space, because remember, God is moving. Remember, God is moving. And so if God is moving, you don't have any time to be comfortable with the familiar. You got to get busy moving. Keep it moving. You got to keep it moving. You got to keep it moving. You got to keep it moving. Keep it moving. You got to keep it moving. So let's talk about the name, the nature, the application of God. We say that one of the names or natures of God is principle. And we know that God as principle is the fundamental basis and starting point of what we call practical Christianity. Understanding God as principle is the fundamental and basis point of what we call practical Christianity. A simple word for practical Christianity is living out the truth you know. Do not tell me what you teach, what you believe, what you understand, what you have faith in. Let me see how you walk and talk in it. Don't tell me that God is prosperity and you ain't demonstrating it. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, I'm not tripping, I'm just saying, maybe I'm tripping a little bit, but I'm just saying. If God is principle, then how do I come to understand principle and live out of the principle that I know? Because unused truth means unfulfilled demonstrations. When we say that God is principle, we mean that God is definite, exact, and unchangeable rule of action. Ooh, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. So how do we access principle? We access principle through the activity of our mind or through consciousness. So watch this. Even if your body is not moving, your mind is. Even if your body has become comfortable with the situation, your mind is still moving to either move you out of or keep you settled in the situation, condition, or circumstance you're in. You might think that you're okay, but if your mind is moving you out of, then God, as a rule, exact rule of action, is beginning to conspire to move you into some new space. And so there are some people that you've been kicking it with that you're not going to be able to kick it with no more, because in your mind you already left. There are some broke days that are behind you because in your mind, you've already decided, I'm not doing that no more. There are some challenges in your body that you've been having that you've said to yourself, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. I've had enough of this. God, as a healer, get to work. And so when we understand God as principle, we understand that principle or God is not limited by time or matter. Let me say it to you another way. God is not limited by the stuff you going through. Stop tripping. What you tripping about? You tripping because you see it with your eyes. But when you get in touch with your understanding of God as principle, you come into the realization that God is not limited by this little stuff I'm working through. The only thing that's limited is my mind. Get your mind right. I got to get my mind right. I believe I can't remember my brother's name. I can't remember his name, Curtis Mayfield. Why don't you check out your mind? He said, you need to check out your mind. It's been with you all the time. Why don't you check out your mind? See, it's not that God is limited, it's that my mind is limited. But what is that also telling me? That's telling me that I have not been aligning my mind with the mind of God if my mind remains limited. I want you to understand God as principle. And if you stay stuck on the appearance, you won't come into the understanding of God as bigger than the appearance. You still with me? We say that God is omnipresence. We say that God is omnipresence, the only presence everywhere. Omnipresent meaning everywhere, evenly present. If God is omnipresence, the only presence everywhere, then there truly, really is no spot. I love how that rolls off our lips. But my God, when the storm comes, sometimes we get like the disciples when the boat starts to rock. And we start getting nervous and like, uh-oh, the tempest is about to take us under. And we forget that deep within the hull of the ship, buried within our souls, is the Christ presence. And when we just go and wake up the Christ presence, see, that's the challenge. We are the Christ, but the Christ is asleep. You are the Christ, but your awareness of you as Christ is sleep. You are the Christ, but your awareness of you as Christ is sleep. Down in the bottom of the ship, resting, chilling, just kicking back, forgetting that the storm is coming. But when you get enough of having enough, you will wake that Christ presence up and say, Master, the tempest is raging. The billows are tossing high. Do you not care if we perish? Don't you see they keep sending bills and cut off notices? You ain't doing nothing about it. They sending pink slips. They talking about closing schools. Where you at? And then this omnipresent awareness comes. It says, peace, be still. Just because you don't understand don't mean I understand. This is why your Christ can't afford to stay asleep. Just because in your conscious mind you don't understand does not mean that in your Christ mind you don't have the understanding. You have to wake up to your Christ self so that you can access the name and nature and application of God in any way that you need. We say that God is omnipotence, the one and only power, or omnipotent, all powerful, all the power there is. Now, I might be missing something. If God is all the power, then where is the power that's in the appearance of the experience? See, I'm tripping because if God is all the power, if God is all the power, then where is the power that I think is the power that's in the experience that's keeping me limited and closed in to this experience? Because we say over here that God is all the power. But in my experience, I'm experiencing something that says this thing has power. But if God is all the power, and I am the go-between between all the power and my experience that appears to have some power, if I withdraw what I think is power from the no power and get back in alignment with the all power, then the appearance of power has to come into the realization that it has no power. And if it has no power, what in the world am I afraid of? I thought you had power. You ain't got no power. You were just pretending to have power. The doctor said, this is what's going on. And I said, you ain't got no power. The bill collector said, this is what's going on. And I said, you ain't got no power. The person who's tired of being with me and who I'm tired of being with said, I'm going on. I said, you ain't got no power. When we understand God as omnipotence, when we understand that God is not just power, but the only power everywhere, then the appearance only has the power that God gives it. The appearance only has the power that God gives it. Jesus, when Jesus was talking to the folks who came to get him, he said, unless my Father gave it to you, you could have no power. See, this is someone who understands. He said, right now, really, I could call a host of angels and we can, I can't say it like I almost said it. I could call a host of angels and we can get it cracking right now. I cleaned it up real good, real quick. It has no power. It only has the power that God gives it. And I hope you're ready for this. I hope you're ready for this. The one who is one with God is God. See, we said earlier on, we have to heal the sense of separation. And so when you heal the sense of separation, you recognize that God shows up expressing in, through, and as you. And so since you have the power and you gave it the power, when you get tired of the appearance pretending to have power, you just take your power right back. We say that God is omniscience, the source of all knowledge, the all-knowing. The all-knowing. We said that God is the source. I talked about the source a little bit already. We said that God is divine mind, right? This ever-present, all-knowing mind, the absolute, the unlimited, all-wise, all-knowing one. And so why do I sit in the dark recesses of my mind confused about what is? When, as I understand it, I have the ability to allow my mind to just switch over or change over or refocus or reconcentrate on the divine mind. It's not something I have to leave outside of my body to access. I only have to change my mind. And when I start changing my mind, what happens? My life, my world, and my affairs start to change, because the God as principle is exact. And if my mind is exact about what I want, if I change my mind, my situation must change. We say that God is divine mind. And we say that we have consciousness in, we have awareness in the one mind. So you and I must get off of our human mind so that we can access our divine mind. We have to get off of our human mind. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a human mind. You need your human mind. You need your human mind. You want to have your human mind. Nothing wrong with it. We say that God is law. And God as law is principle in action. We say that God is law. And it's important to recognize that God as law is not like the law of the land. See, God as law is absolute and different from the law of the land. See, sometimes the law of the land can be tweaked and worked out depending upon who you are and who you know and what kind of access and resources you have. See, sometimes the laws of the land are intended to help some get ahead and keep some underneath. We're not talking about the law as it relates to the land. We're talking about the law as it relates to the Creator. See, the law as it relates to the Creator recognizes that you can't break it, but it can break you. You can't break it, but you can misuse it. And we misuse it when we don't have the proper understanding of the law of mind in action. See, the law provides a consistent and orderly outworking of what's been on our minds. See, you don't ever have to ask anybody what you think, and you don't ever have to ask anybody what they're thinking. Just look at the law of their demonstration. Don't that you? No, don't. See, you don't have to keep asking them if they love you. You don't have to ask them if they appreciate you. You don't have to ask them if they understand you. Just look at how they handle you. The way that they handle you will be consistent with their understanding of the law of what you will accept. I just gave you a page out the book. I just gave it to you. I just gave it to you. And then you have to be willing to not ignore what they show you. You have to be willing to not make excuses for them when they show you what their value is of you. Because watch this. If they understood that they were God, they would not handle you in certain ways, or they would handle you in certain other ways. You know, I shouldn't have added this fourth point to this bulletin, don't you? We would have been real good if I'd have just kept it at what was there originally. We would have been straight. The choir could start playing. Be like, he was on it today. He got everything in there. But I'm not going to rush it. I want you to get this. I'm not going to rush it. The divine paradoxes. I want you to understand this, because that oftentimes there exist paradoxes in consciousness. Let me show it to you this way. Like, you can be a student of principle and be working through a boatload of problems. That's a paradox. You can have a clear understanding of truth and still be working through or running like Moses, be running from some trouble. And so there are paradoxes that exist. And oftentimes there are paradoxes that exist around the nature of God and what God is and who God is. And so I can't run through it today.